Hi, and welcome to our Data Science for Ecologists in R series. In the last video, you have learned how to ideally record your data and how to prepare it before importing it into R. Today, we are going to learn how to prepare R and how to load our data. So this is what we're going to do, how to import our data.
So first, you'll need to download R and RStudio, which you can do here. All of these links are also provided in the description of the video. And once you have downloaded R, you'll also need to download the datasets and the scripts. There are many different types of data that can be loaded into R, but we will start off with simply loading a data frame from a CSV file. So if you have your data in Excel, the first step is to export your data as a CSV file, and then you can import it into R. Here, we first download the dataset. You find a link to the GitHub repository that contains the dataset and other important files, also in the description below. Now you just download the whole TidyData repository, which will contain all the files that you need. In this folder, you will find an R project with the name TidyData.rproj. And when sharing data, working with R project is the easiest way, because our projects, they're associated with a working directory. So each project has its own directory, which is relative to the location of the project. The advantage of this is that we're not using absolute file path when referring to, for example, a data file, as this one here. This absolute file path is different for every user, and links break very easily if you move things around. So working with relative file path is much easier when sharing data and projects, because this will set the working directory directly to our project folder, and we can all use the same relative links from there. So let's open our first R project by just double-clicking the project. This will open RStudio, and you can see here in the Files panel, you can see all of the files that are associated with the R project. Now we want to load a script, which I have already prepared, which will help us to import data. And you find it in the Import Data folder. So you just go in there and double click on the Import Data script. This will now open the R script, which you can see here, which is a file where I've prepared commands that you can then use later.
In addition to the script, you also have the console down here, which is where R commands are executed. You can run commands directly from your script, but alternatively, you can also directly type the commands into the console and, for example, save variables as x equals 4, which are then saved in the global environment, which you can see up here. So whenever you start a new R session, it is good practice to clear your global environments, which you can do with this command. This does not clear loaded packages, but at least it clears off any variables that have been stored in the global environment. Then the next thing that we want to do is we want to load our data into R. For this, we can use the command read_data.csv, since our data is in a CSV file, and then we need to specify the path where we find our data. In our case, we are working with a project, so what we need is to specify the relative path of where our data file is relative to our project. So a data file is, when we go and check here, we can look here at the repository, we can see, okay, here is our project, then there's the dataset folder, and within this dataset folder, we do find our data file that we want to load, in this case, plant height. We specify header equals true because our data has a header, and then we can load our data set and save it as DT. Once you've loaded the data, you can see it appears here in our global environment. You can see here how many observations are saved in the data sheet, and then you can see how many columns are in the data sheet. And this should make you suspicious because it only contains one variable. So let's have a look at it. We can just type head and then our data, which will show us the head of our data. And then you can see that this looks pretty weird, and we just have one column. where all of our variables are in. And this is because we haven't used the right separator. This is something that often happens when you're using a Mac, because often Macs use a semicolon as a separator instead of the comma. So we can specify here that we want to use a semicolon as a separator, do the exact same thing again, and then we can see, oh, our data file changed and now we have 7 variables. And again, still 33 observations. So we can again have a look at the head of our dataset, and now we see that there's 7 columns and it looks much better than before. And with this, we have loaded our first dataset into R.